Welcome to the Author's Porch, where every good conversation happens. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride from author to author. We want to give you an experience where you learn and enjoy the conversation. Authors tell you about their journey, you learn about new books, and at the end of the day, you go home with a smile on your face because the Author's Porch is a beacon of light, bringing you home to the family you never knew you had. We hope that you enjoy the show. Hey everybody, welcome to the Author's Porch, where every great conversation happens. We are super excited because May, we have got a fully stocked show. I told you I was going to mess up my words, Bill. I'm so glad you're here with me because I would just be sitting here messing up everything.
How about a fully stocked roster of guests? How about
Thank
that?
you. Thank you. So, guys, let me tell you, Bill has got this beautiful mind. And I was telling him before we came on the show that I was researching, full name William Sargent, and I was researching everything that I could so that I could know as much as possible because Bill has this absolutely astonishing mind. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction before we go in and just have this wonderful conversation. He has 27 books that he has published. He is also a Boston Globe Winship Award winner. And loves science and the environment. He went to Harvard, and I saw somewhere that he originally went for government because he is the son of a former um, governor of Massachusetts. So, of course, he was going to go and follow in the footsteps, but somewhere it said that formaldehyde triggered your love for nature. And that's where you went into your love for science and the environment. And now you do a lot of work in the energy conservation field, and you have a lot of knowledge in that area. And you go and you've been on oceanic ships, you've been all over the world, oil rigs and everything. And I'm going, I've been to a lot of places, but I haven't been where Bill has been, and I need to really know what I'm talking about, or at least know how to listen effectively tonight. So I got caught up right in the beginning, and like the beautiful mind that you are, you were able to jump in there. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Bill. I am excited to have this conversation.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So formaldehyde, I've really got to understand how that triggered your love for nature. When I read that, I was like, that is the most interesting thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. It actually, it sort of brought, it was like what Proust and what was it? Memory of things past,
Mhm.
tasting the Madeleines and his tea. As an undergraduate, I spent all my time in the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. The whole building smelled of formaldehyde because it
Mm.
was full of all kinds of specimens from all over the world.
Yeah.
The smell of formaldehyde sort of reawakenings an intellectual awakening that I had at that time.
Yeah. That's interesting. And that's all it took to get you away from a life in politics. It wasn't nothing else.
no, no, actually, I grew up. I like to say I was a happy heathen on the Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And I grew up, I was out on a boat every day. I'd get up at 6 in the morning and I'd be out. I'd be looking at horseshoe crabs and catching fish and digging clams and just enjoying myself. So I always had this appreciation of nature.
Mhm.
And then I also like to write. And I sort of think those two things go together. There's a
Mm.
lot of nature writers that have an appreciation for nature and also like the writing. So then, actually, when I was in college, I actually was sitting beside Al Gore, and we were in a special seminar. And Roger Revelle showed us a graph of carbon dioxide going up in the atmosphere. It was the first time that anybody had seen this graph.
Mhm.
And we, as soon as we saw that, we realized, wow, this is a real problem. Now that the scientists know about it, by the time we graduate, it'll all be solved. And that was 40 years ago. And what have we done about it? Virtually nothing. We're actually just within the last couple of years, we're starting to come to grips with some of those things. And then the other thing I did is I took the year off and I worked on an oceanographic vessel, and we went to Africa and South America and up into the Baltic. And I was taking plankton tows every day. So you put a net down and you collect all the surface animals and the animals at about 200 meters.
Mhm.
Um, and every time we did that, the net would come up full of oil. Uh, and I realized, the whole world, all the world's oceans were covered with oil at that time. Now we're concerned with plastic. At that
Yeah.
time, it was oil, and it was mostly coming from ships. And they did pass regulations, so now the oil tankers have to have double hulls, so there's less of a problem with oil. So we can, we can solve some of these problems.
Yeah, I had a great conversation with a gentleman who worked in the waste management field. He's a PhD. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was last year, and he worked in conservation in the waste management field, and it's so interesting. All of these great minds that, like yourself, who can bring to the table these opportunities to make our world better, but it comes to the regulations that just don't it just doesn't start to happen sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because the information is there, right?
The information is there and the technology is there.
Mhm.
There's a whole lot of interesting ideas, and people are trying all of them. We don't really know which ones are going to pan out
Yeah.
and which ones might not. One of the things that I've just been writing about, everybody's concerned about that big blob of sargassum weed that's about the size of the United States that is starting to come ashore in Florida. And of
Mhm.
course, it will ruin the tourist business because it
Yeah.
rots and it stinks and everything like that. But there's also an opportunity there. You can use that as fertilizer. So if you bury that in the sand dunes, it fertilizes the dune grass, and so you'll have a thick bed of dune grass that is protecting the shore and stopping erosion. The
Mm.
other thing you can do is if you bury it, if you sink it
Mhm.
below 450 feet, the little nodules that keep it floating will collapse, and then it will sink all the way to the ocean floor. And what you've done is you've removed all of that carbon dioxide. You've removed the carbon
Mhm.
that's in the sargassum. So it's a fairly cheap, inexpensive and easy way to get rid of a fair amount of carbon dioxide. So there are a lot of things like that. Um,
Wow.
yeah.
Now we live down here on the border of Mexico. We're in Brownsville, Texas, where SpaceX Starbase is at. And
Okay.
recently we had
I've heard of Texas, by the way.
yeah. I hope so. I hope so. We love our little plot of land down here. So we
I
recently go ahead, sorry.
no, go ahead.
We recently had the largest rocket that went up, and of course it exploded in the air. They were using fuel that is found on Mars, and I'm not very savvy with the name of what this fuel is, but it's one of the fuels that is found naturally on Mars. And the reason why Elon used
Mhm.
it was because the hopes of obviously going there and coming back one day, because there wouldn't be enough to get them back if they don't use something that's naturally on Mars.
Yeah.
And there's a lawsuit now. They're suing some people, somebody's suing the FAA because they do not believe that they did a properly, well, economic impact
Hmm. Hmm.
on the area down here, because Boca Chica Beach, which is a natural beach to the area, has a lot of wildlife. It's a wildlife preserve. but
Hmm.
Starbase is there.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it's fascinating. Like I said, I don't know a whole lot, but I pay attention to those small little things. I
yeah,
cut, on the bottles when you have the plastic, I cut it so that
yeah,
the turtles don't get stuck in it, but I think it's amazing.
yeah. I can tell you a Texas story,
Love it.
and that is when my father was in the 10th Mountain, which was the ski troops, and one of
Yeah.
his buddies in the 10th Mountain said, uh, "Oh, you should buy. I can get you a percentage of an oil well in Texas." So he bought that. And then when he was in office, he had to divest himself of it. So he gave it to me and my two sisters. And that was, that was fine. That was in the days when oil was a good thing.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
but we started getting telephone calls and letters and even checks in the mail, people wanting to buy, my section of the oil well. And I figured, well, these guys know something I don't know.
Uh-huh.
So I hung on to it. My sisters both sold it. I hung on to mine to figure it out. And then I figured out, oh, what they're doing is they're probably fracking this well.
Mm.
So I called up the company. It was Denbury. And I said, when are you going to start fracking my well? And they said, no, we're not fracking it. What we're doing is we're taking carbon dioxide from an electric plant in Mississippi, and we're putting it down in the well to push the oil out. But what we're doing is we're keeping the carbon dioxide down there. So they were actually sequestering carbon dioxide. So
Wow.
it was, and frankly, I've always been very impressed with how knowledgeable people in Texas are about energy.
Mm.
And as you probably know, Texas is the leading state for both wind energy and solar energy. But I'm always impressed, when you talk to people in Texas, they say, oh, yeah, I live above the Permian Basin, or I'm on, here or there, and they know the geology. All I know is I took rocks for jocks in college, and that was about it.
Well, I do know when I'm driving, so we're on the southernmost tip of Texas. The only thing more
Right,
southern than where I'm at is South Padre Island, and the ocean.
right,
So, when I drive out of the valley here, I drive by Corpus, and Corpus is even more north than I am, and
right.
all you see is windmills for hours and hours. You're seeing
Yeah,
windmills, and it's such a beautiful sight. I keep
yeah,
telling myself to stop somewhere with a camera and take some awe-inspiring picture, but I never do because I'm always like, no, I got to get to where I'm going because it's
yep,
usually a 17-hour drive. But
yeah.
it's funny you mentioned the 10th Mountain. I was stationed with the 10th Mountain Army Division in Afghanistan in 2006. So
Wow.
a great, phenomenal group of individuals. God bless every single one of them because I couldn't do what they do. So I just
Yeah.
want to give a shout out to all of the troops out there, the 10th
They,
Mountain Army Division. They're amazing.
yeah, they were probably better behaved than the guys, with my father. They used to get drunk and rappel down the side of I forget, the big hotel in Denver. Uh, but everybody let them do it.
Well, yeah,
They, they were heroes.
there's a little bit of that going on. Sometimes you get away with certain things when you
Yeah,
have to go do some really sucky stuff, right?
yeah, exactly.
So let's
Yeah.
talk about your latest book that you have out. What is your main message with this book?
Well, it's basically a book about the lives of three journalists, and they're covering COVID, the climate, and the war in Ukraine. Um, and so, frankly, the book came about because, in the midst of, I had been writing a lot of natural history books about, horseshoe crabs and lobsters and squid and how they're used in medicine and stuff like that. But all of a sudden, we were in the midst of three huge crises, with COVID and the climate and the war in Ukraine. And I really wanted to get into that. I actually wrote this book right here. I don't know if you could see it. It's called World on Edge. And that was a nonfiction book. But then I realized, no, this should really be a people story. And so I kind of used a lot of the information from that book and rewrote it as a novel about these three journalists. And, I think they're very personable people, and they have their own life stories, and they grow. The woman who's covering the environment, she's famous for jumping on planes and going to Siberia and to Dar es Salaam and all over the world.
Yeah.
But gradually she realizes, no, that she's very much part of the problem. Flying around the world like that is about the worst thing you could do in terms of carbon emissions. So later on in the book, she actually gets a Tesla and she drives around the country in a Tesla, doing the same kinds of stories. And actually, I just drove from Boston down to New Orleans, and my partner continued on through Texas to Tucson. And you know how much gas we used? None.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
and
amazing.
we probably only cost us maybe $200 or $300 in charging fees, because she has a daughter in New York who has an outlet, and another one in Washington. So it was, and she has one on her roof. So her roof provides a third of the energy for heating and cooling her house. A third of the energy goes to charging the Tesla, and a third goes back to our town.
Wow.
So it's and it's, I think it's quite beautiful that, these are dark glass shingles that you have
Yeah.
on the house. It's just very impressive, and they're fun to drive. It's like driving a rocket.
Oh, the only thing that has stopped me from getting, so we have a Tesla dealership here in town, obviously, since
Right.
we have space at Starbase here 20
Yeah.
minutes down the road. The only thing that has stopped me from getting a Tesla is that they don't have one that'll fit all of my dogs. I have 5 dogs, me
Yeah.
and my husband, and we all go together. So I'm like, I need one just a little bit bigger, please, Elon. Can you give me
You
just one a little bit bigger?
you've got, well, maybe if he hears this show, I'm sure he'll give you one. Or
If
maybe
he
you can get two. One for the dogs and one for you.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm gonna hook it up. There we go. I'm gonna just hook it up to the one car, and then we're gonna we're gonna trolley on by.
There we go.
That's a good idea. I find that story fascinating because we are in the day and age where we're having massive things happening all at once. I was in Bulgaria. I was in Kosovo in 2008, and in Bulgaria in 2015, and my one of the gentlemen who worked for me was a captain in the Yugoslavian army, and that was back in the Cold War time, and he was telling me how some of the things that had went on during the Kosovo war and when the Ukraine war kicked
Mhm.
off,
Yeah.
it was like all of the things he told me started coming back up in my mind, and I just found it just, wow, this is happening during my time. And then all the stuff with COVID, and then all the climate stuff, and you're right, it's all coexisting at the same
And,
time,
and
whereas
and not only coexisting, but I think it's all related.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people think that part of the reason that Putin started the war is that he got very paranoid
Mhm.
with COVID, and kind of wanted to make his mark, in Russian history,
Yeah.
and so that might be the relation there. Certainly there's a connection between COVID and the environment.
Mm.
So I think they are all connected, and that was one of the things that I try to get into in the book.
Mm. Very interesting. If you could pinpoint one thing in the environment that, or one thing that humans or even legislature could kind of push our environment to a better place. If we could just one big impact? What could be one big impact that we could do? I mean, human kindness, obviously, and the human part of it, human kindness would be the
Right.
biggest one. But for the environment, what could we do? Would it be to decrease, and get on solar power? Would it be to get rid of gas? Would it be to get rid of oil? What would be our biggest impact?
Well, the big game changer, of course, will be nuclear energy, fusion.
Mm,
We're making strides. There's a number of different labs, both government labs and privately funded labs,
mhm,
and they're starting to get the funding they need to solve some of these problems. And they're getting some return. They're producing more energy than they have to put in, which is an indicate that's the direction to be going. And it will be unlike fission. You don't have nuclear wastes,
mm,
and it's extremely safe, because if anything happens, the whole system just closes down.
mm.
That would be a huge game changer, and of course, it doesn't release any carbon dioxide.
Now, your characters in your book, do they follow that same train of thought?
Yes, I have the woman. Actually, I have both the woman who is covering the climate and the guy who's covering the war in Ukraine go visit some of the labs, and one of them is the ITER lab in southern France, and that's a government lab. It's a consortium of about 35 different governments that are all working on what's called a tokamak system. And then there's also some systems in the Silicon Valley that are being supported by Bill Gates and all the billionaires, uh, and they're making real strides. And so nobody knows who's going to solve everything first, but I think it is going to. I think all those problems are going to be solved, and and that might happen by the 2030s. And actually, I think the 2030s are going to be really crucial to us,
Mm,
because it's going to be the 100th anniversary of the Dust Bowl. It's also when the tides what are called proxygean tides. And this is when the moon is closest to the earth and the earth is closest to the sun, and you have these extremely high tides, uh,
wow.
plus sea level rise. You're going to have. I remember just 2 weeks ago, in about a dozen major newspapers, there were articles about houses being washed into the sea. And
Yeah,
that was in Miami, that was in New York, that was in New England, it was in Texas, it was in Hawaii and Alaska. So
yeah.
it's happening all over the world. I think I've actually written several books about sea level. I use I've been using an island near us called Plum Island as a case study for sea level
Mhm.
rise, because I think it's the fastest moving problem that we have in the environment, and it's an amazing people story too. I mean,
Mhm.
they've put their whole livelihoods into these houses, and they're about ready to lose everything. So it's a very poignant story, and
Yeah.
um, and the amazing thing is that people are still doing it. I don't know how many times I've seen a house get washed away. They put that empty lot on the market. A developer comes in, buys the lot, builds another house very quickly, and
Mm.
is able to sell it before the next erosion season come. And of course, we had one person bought a house in New England sight unseen from San Francisco, and now
Yeah.
his house is right on the edge of the ocean.
That's a shame. I w
Yeah,
I l watched a news, broadcast just the other day because that's the first thing I do in the morning. I've got my certain news channels. I'm just like my dad. I believe I'm just exactly like him.
yeah,
But, there's an island where I believe it's predominantly Native Americans. I don't know exactly where the island is, but they've evacuated 90% of the people. There's still just a few people left, still living on the island,
Yeah,
but it's almost all under the ocean now, and I can't remember where it's located at. But I watched that, and I just thought they're losing their heritage. Like this is their island.
right.
This
Yeah,
is their piece of land, and only they're natural inhabitants of this island. They're the only people that inhabit this
yeah,
island.
yeah. Actually, we might have seen the same thing. There was one, and this was an island off of Panama,
Okay.
and the people were living very, very closely, just packed in there, and the waters have been rising, and they're going to relocate all those people to track houses. I mean,
Yeah.
and here they are. They've been on this beautiful little atoll, out in the middle of the ocean, and
Yeah.
now they're going to be just in these,
Yeah.
sort of barren track houses that they've just cut out of the jungle.
And
So they're going to lose, all that heritage and culture.
right. And
Yeah,
yeah, I probably because I watch Good Morning America, ABC. That's my favorite news station. So
right.
it was
Yeah,
probably, yeah. But it's absolutely fascinating because our world is changing, and instead of flowing with the change as humans, because we are human, we try to fight against it and say, well, we've got these big brains, we'll just make it work for us.
yeah.
Um, I understand.
It's those big brains that have gotten us in trouble.
Right? I understand some things we can make work for us, but it
Yeah,
has to work for us and our environment. And when we can do that, there becomes this beautiful synchronicity that it works. It works wonderful, and one doesn't have to lose. And I think that's the beauty of climate change and conservationism,
right.
basically, right? So, where can everybody go and grab a copy of your book at?
Well, you can get it. You can, order it through your local bookstore. You can also get it on my site, which is williamsargent.net, I think, and you can also get it on Amazon.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And if people wanna connect with you, Bill, where can they connect with you at? Is it d are your socials on your website as well?
Yeah, through the website. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. And do you have a copy of it that we can see it? Or is it just
Oh,
your
yes, I do.
okay,
There we go, right here.
backstory? I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
With a
it's amazing.
with a
The
with a with a terrible reflection on it, but
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone ever sees what my eyes actually look like anymore with these glasses, so I'm quite used to the reflection myself. I've
yeah,
added your website here so people have a clickable link, but if there's
terrific.
anybody out there when they listen to the podcast later in the week, it's https semicolon backslash backslash WILLIAMSARGENT so they can go and they can write it down as they're listening. But make sure you're not driving or anything like that when you're listening to the podcast, because we do have some folks that drive to work and listen because they get some great information from the authors that come on to the porch and share their wonderful knowledge. So, what is your next big project? Because I'm sure you've got some amazing ones out there.
I'm just writing some articles. I write for my local paper.
Mm,
So I'm writing some articles. I would love to do another fiction book. I really enjoyed that.
yeah.
So I'm going to see how this one does, and if it does well, I may write another fiction book.
Well, sounds
And
fascinating because reporters, I mean, like I said, I've got my morning news, I have my afternoon news, and then the soap operas come on, I press mute and I sit in silence for a little while. Soap operas are great, but they're not my gig
yeah,
unless they're Golden Girls. I still watch Golden Girls. And then
Oh,
my even then
that's the dirtiest program on television.
and then my evening news comes in and then I fall asleep. So I
Right.
think a lot of people want to get into the heads of reporters. And then,
Mhm.
of course, you've got the trifecta of the things going on a lot of people want to learn about. So I think that it's going to be a smashing hit across the globe, not just in the United States, but everywhere, because it is a worldwide issue that's hitting.
Well, thank you very much. And Yeah, you know, journalists live really exciting lives. You know, you're constantly, you know, going off to a different place, and you're constantly learning things. So I try to bring some of that excitement into the book.
Yeah, for me, they live very scary lives.
That's
Like,
true. Yeah.
it is breathtakingly scary, some of the things that I see these journalists living through, like the current journalist who is wrongfully detained in Russia right now. I could not imagine. I will do all of my hosting of my show here in the comfort of my home. Some people are made for certain things. Thank you for the things that you were made for in your beautiful mind and taking care of all the knowledge of helping people make beautiful, wonderful decisions on keeping our climate safe. I'm going to keep talking to people because I love bringing their stories to light, shining the light on them here on the author's porch. I've had a great time talking to you, Bill, and learning so much more. I want to delve into that book. It sounds fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because I have been glued to the screen since these three things have come into the limelight. They've hit very close to home for me. So I'm going to go grab me a copy of Backstory. I hope everybody else goes and grabs a copy of Backstory because you really want to learn more from a journalistic viewpoint and from somebody who has the actual knowledge and expertise in the field of all three of these items. So, Bill, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure we hit on? Because I get a little chatty sometimes and forget that I'm not the guest.
I've had that problem too. I've tried to sit on the other side, and all I do is talk. Or right, I can't ask questions. No, I'll just say that the book. I try to make it. You know, if I can understand something, then I can explain it to somebody else. So a lot of the chapters are very short, but I try to get to the essence of some of these often fairly complex issues. But I try to explain them simply and kind of make it fun. And the nice thing about fiction is you can have two or three people talking about it, so they can ask all the dumb questions that you might be, you know, scared to ask because you don't want to look like you don't understand what they're talking about. So I mean, that in my field, and this is probably true with you too, there's no the only dumb question is the one you never asked.
Very
That
true.
that's when you get in trouble, and you later on say, gee, I wish I'd figured that out. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Bill, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank
Um,
you.
it's been a pleasure.
And you ask very good questions.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I did try to make sure I did enough research. I was like, oh man, we've got a Harvard graduate. He's got a lot of awards. He's super smart. You better learn. You better learn. Guys, make sure you come back here. We have more shows coming later on the week. Make sure you come back and find your best next favorite author, your next favorite book, because that's what we want to do. Shine a light on your next favorite author and learn about great books out there in the world. Bill, thanks again for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time here on the Author's Porch. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.